The crack of a pistol shot split the air as the auctioneer called for silence, his voice booming across the dusty market square of Redemption Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1876. Sophia Montgomery stood on the wooden platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin, her once fine blue dress now tattered and soiled from weeks of captivity. The crowd of rough-looking men jostled for position, their hungry eyes appraising her like she was nothing more than livestock. $500 for this fine specimen, the auctioneer called out, his tobacco-stained teeth gleaming in the harsh summer sun. Educated, can read and write, cook and clean. Previous owner claims she has a gentle disposition. Sophia fought to keep her chin high despite the humiliation burning through her veins. 3 months ago, she had been the daughter of a respected Boston businessman. Now, after the stagecoach attack that had killed her parents and the driver, she was property to be sold to the highest bidder in this God-forsaken town. 600, called a man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. His eyes wandered over her body in a way that made her stomach turn. 700, countered another, a portly man whose breath she could smell even from the platform. The auctioneer grinned, pleased with the rising bids. Do I hear 800 for this fine lady? Sophia scanned the crowd desperately, searching for a friendly face, for anyone who might help her. The townsfolk, women clutching children's hands, storekeepers standing in doorways looked on with either disinterest or pity, but none made a move to intervene. This was the frontier, where law existed only as far as a man could enforce it himself. $1,000, came a new voice, deep and commanding. The crowd parted as a tall figure moved forward. Quentin Hayes sat atop a magnificent chestnut stallion, his face partially shadowed by the brim of his black Stetson. His weathered duster coat hung open, revealing the gleam of a silver star pinned to his vest, a Texas Ranger's badge. But he was far from Texas now, and the badge held little authority in this lawless corner of Wyoming. Now we're talking business, the auctioneer said with greedy enthusiasm. $1,000 from the gentleman on horseback. Do I hear, you misunderstand, Quentin interrupted, his voice carrying easily across the now silent market. I'm not bidding. I'm telling you what the fine is for human trafficking in this territory. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer's smile faltered. Now see here, mister. This is a legitimate sale. This woman was found alone, no kin to claim her. By frontier law, there is no such law, Quentin said, guiding his horse closer to the platform. And you know it. The scarred man who had bid earlier stepped forward, hand hovering near his pistol. You're outnumbered, Ranger. Best ride on out of town. Quentin's hand didn't move toward his own weapon. Instead, he fixed the man with a steady gaze. I could, but then I'd have to come back with a dozen more like me, and trust me, none of you want that kind of attention. Sophia watched the standoff with her heart hammering in her chest. The ranger was either very brave or very foolish. In one swift motion, Quentin spurred his horse forward, closing the distance to the platform in seconds. Before anyone could react, he leaned down, gripped Sophia around the waist and pulled her onto his horse in front of him. Hold tight, he murmured in her ear as shots rang out. Sophia grabbed the saddle horn as Quentin wheeled the horse around. The animal's powerful muscles bunched beneath them, and then they were galloping down the main street, dust billowing in their wake. More shots followed, but they were already turning the corner, the buildings of Redemption Creek receding behind them. They rode hard for nearly an hour, following the winding path of a creek until the sounds of pursuit faded completely. Only when Quentin was certain they weren't being followed did he slow the horse to a walk, allowing the animal to catch its breath. Are you hurt, madam? he asked, his voice gentler now than it had been in town. Sophia shook her head, still trying to process what had happened. "No, I thank you. They took me after the stagecoach was attacked. My parents." Her voice broke. "I'm sorry about your family," Quentin said, genuine sympathy in his tone. "I've been tracking that gang for weeks. They've hit 3 coaches in this territory." He guided the horse off the trail toward a stand of cottonwoods by the creek. Once there, he dismounted and helped Sophia down. Her legs trembled beneath her, unaccustomed to riding, and he steadied her with a strong hand on her arm. "Let me get those ropes off you," he said, drawing a knife from his boot. Sophia held out her bound wrists, wincing as he carefully cut through the rough hemp. When the ropes fell away, angry red marks remained where they had chafed her skin. "We should clean those," Quentin said, frowning at the abrasions. He led her to the creek bank and dipped his bandana in the cool water, then gently wrapped it around her wrists. "It's not much, but it'll help until we reach somewhere safer." "Where are we going?" Sophia asked, looking around at the wilderness surrounding them. Nothing looked familiar. The landscape of Wyoming was so different from the manicured gardens and brick buildings of Boston. "There's a small ranch about 10 miles from here. The owner, Miller, is a good man. We can rest there, figure out our next move." Quentin looked up at the sky, gauging the position of the sun. "We should make it by nightfall if we keep a steady pace." Sophia nodded, too exhausted to argue. She watched as Quentin efficiently set about preparing to leave, checking his horse's saddle, refilling his canteen from the creek. There was something reassuring about his methodical movements, the calm certainty with which he worked. "I'm Sophia Montgomery," she said suddenly, realizing they hadn't been properly introduced. "My father was taking me to San Francisco to live with my aunt after my mother died of fever last winter." The lie came easily. She wasn't ready to share the full truth with this stranger, no matter how heroic his actions had been. Quentin paused, studying her for a moment with eyes the color of the stormy sky. "Quentin Hayes," he replied. "Most folks call me Quint." He hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry about your mother and your father." "Thank you," Sophia said quietly, "for everything." They rode double on Quentin's horse, Sophia seated in front of him. The closeness was improper by Boston standards, but out here, propriety seemed a distant concern compared to survival. She could feel the solid warmth of his chest against her back, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. As they rode, Quentin explained that he'd been tracking the gang responsible for the stagecoach robberies for nearly 2 months. "They don't usually take captives," he said grimly. "Most times they leave no witnesses. You were unfortunate to survive in their eyes." "And fortunate that you found me," Sophia replied, a shiver running through her despite the warm afternoon. Quentin's ranch contact turned out to be a gruff older man with a weathered face and kind eyes. Joseph Miller welcomed them into his modest cabin without question, and his wife Martha immediately took Sophia under her wing. "Land sakes, child, what they've done to you," Martha clucked, leading Sophia to a back room where a tin bathtub stood. "You get yourself cleaned up. I'll find you some proper clothes." The hot bath was the first real comfort Sophia had experienced since the attack. She scrubbed away weeks of grime, wincing as the soap stung her various cuts and bruises. Martha had left her a simple cotton dress, plain but clean, and Sophia gratefully changed into it, feeling more human than she had in a long time. When she emerged, she found Quentin and Joseph deep in conversation at the kitchen table, a map spread between them. Both men stood when she entered the room. "You look much better, Miss Montgomery," Quentin said, his eyes taking in the transformation with appreciation that he quickly masked. Martha set a plate of stew in front of Sophia. "Eat, child, your skin and bones." The food was simple but delicious, and Sophia realized how hungry she was. As she ate, she listened to the men discuss their next steps. "The gang's likely moved on by now," Joseph was saying. "After that stunt you pulled in town, they'll know you're onto them." Quentin nodded. "I need to get Miss Montgomery somewhere safe, then pick up their trail again." "Where will you take me?" Sophia asked between bites. "There's a stage heading east from Silverton in 3 days. I can get you to Fort Laramie, where there's a proper garrison. They can arrange safe passage back to Boston." He paused. "I assume that's where you'd want to go, back home." Sophia set down her fork. "I have no home in Boston anymore. My father sold everything to finance our move west." Another lie, but a necessary one. "My aunt in San Francisco is my only family now." Quentin studied her face for a moment, and Sophia had the uncomfortable feeling he could see through her deceptions. But he merely nodded. "San Francisco, then. But we'll still need to reach Fort Laramie first. It's the safest route west from here." That night, Sophia slept in the miller's spare room, the first real bed she'd had since the stagecoach. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the auction block, felt the rope around her wrists, heard the jeers of the men bidding on her. She rose before dawn and found Quentin already awake, sitting on the porch cleaning his revolver by the light of a small oil lamp. He nodded to her as she stepped outside, the wooden boards creaking beneath her feet. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, not looking up from his work. "No." Sophia wrapped her arms around herself against the pre-dawn chill. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Quentin's hands stilled. "But I did." "Why?" The question had been burning in her mind. "Why risk yourself for a stranger?" He was silent for so long that Sophia thought he might not answer. Finally, he set the gun aside and looked up at her. 8 years ago, my sister was taken by raiders on the Texas border by the time I found her." His jaw tightened. No one should suffer that fate. Sophia sat down beside him, close but not touching. "I'm sorry about your sister." "It was a long time ago," he said, though the pain in his voice suggested otherwise. "After that, I joined the Rangers, thought maybe I could prevent the same happening to someone else." "Like me," Sophia said softly. Quentin nodded once, then returned to cleaning his gun with methodical precision. Sophia watched his hands work, strong and sure, and felt a curious warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the rising sun beginning to peek over the distant mountains. They left the Miller Ranch mid-morning, well supplied with food and water for their journey. Martha had found an old hat for Sophia to protect her fair skin from the harsh sun, and Joseph had loaned Quentin a second horse, a steady mare named Daisy, so they wouldn't have to ride double. "You ever ridden before?" Quentin asked as he adjusted Daisy's stirrups for Sophia's shorter legs. "A little in the park back home," she admitted. "Nothing like this." He showed her how to hold the reins properly, how to sit to avoid getting saddle sore, and the basic commands to guide the horse. "Daisy's gentle. She'll take good care of you." The first day of travel passed without incident. Quentin kept them off the main trails, following game paths and dry creek beds. He explained that the gang might have scouts watching the roads and it was better to be cautious. They made camp that evening in a sheltered hollow, where a small spring provided fresh water. Quentin insisted on taking first watch while Sophia slept, despite her protests that she could take a turn. "I'm used to it," he said simply. "Been sleeping with one eye open since I was 16. When Sophia woke a few hours later, she found Quentin sitting exactly where she'd left him, his back against a boulder, revolver across his lap. The moon illuminated his profile, the straight nose, the firm jaw shadowed with stubble, the slight furrow between his brows as he scanned the darkness. "You should have woken me," she said, sitting up. "You need rest too." Quentin glanced at her. I've gone longer without sleep. That doesn't mean you should, Sophia countered, moving to sit beside him. I may be a city girl, but I'm not helpless. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I'm beginning to see that. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of wind through the sparse trees, the occasional snort from one of the horses. Tell me about Boston, Quentin said eventually. What's it like, living in a big city? Sophia described the cobblestone streets, the grand buildings of Beacon Hill, the public garden with its swan boats. She told him about attending lectures at the Athenaeum, about concerts and teas and literary societies. As she spoke, she realized how foreign it all must sound to him, this man who had likely spent his entire life under open skies. It sounds confined, Quentin said when she finished. All those people pressed together, all those rules about who can do what and when. It can be, Sophia admitted. But there's also a certain security in knowing what to expect, out here. She gestured at the vast darkness surrounding them. Anything could happen. Quentin's eyes held hers. That frightens you. Wouldn't it frighten anyone? Some people find freedom in the uncertainty. Sophia considered this. And you? Is that what you find? He looked away, gazing out at the moonlit landscape. I used to. Before Sophia could ask what he meant, Quentin stood abruptly. You should get more sleep. We have a long ride tomorrow. The next day brought them to rougher terrain as they skirted the edge of a mountain range. Sophia's muscles ached from the unaccustomed riding, but she didn't complain. Quentin set a steady pace, occasionally glancing back to make sure she was managing. Around midday, they stopped in a small meadow to rest the horses. While Sophia stretched her legs, Quentin climbed a nearby rise to survey the land ahead. He returned with a troubled expression. There's a group of riders about 3 miles east, moving fast, he said, gathering their things. Could be nothing, but I don't like taking chances. They mounted quickly and changed direction, heading deeper into the foothills. The path grew steeper, forcing them to slow their pace as the horses picked their way carefully over rocky ground. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered overhead, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Quentin scanned the hillside, clearly looking for shelter from the approaching storm. There, he said, pointing to a dark opening in the rocky slope about 100 yards ahead. Looks like a cave. We can wait out the weather there. They had just reached the cave entrance when the storm broke, rain coming down in sheets. Quentin quickly unsaddled the horses and secured them under an overhang near the mouth of the cave, while Sophia gathered wood for a fire. The cave was deeper than it had appeared from outside, stretching back about 30 feet into the hillside. It was dry and, more importantly, empty of any current animal residence. Quentin built a small fire near the entrance, where the smoke could escape. We'll stay here tonight, he decided, looking out at the heavy rain. No sense pushing on in this weather. Sophia sat close to the fire, grateful for its warmth as the temperature dropped with the storm. She watched Quentin move about the cave, arranging their supplies, always efficient in his movements. There was something compelling about his quiet competence, so different from the polished manners of the men she had known in Boston. How long have you been a ranger? She asked as he sat down across the fire from her. Going on 10 years now, he replied, accepting the jerky she offered him. Joined up after the war. You fought in the war? Sophia asked, surprised. He didn't seem old enough to have served in the Civil War. Last 2 years, Quentin said with a nod. Lied about my age to enlist when I was 16. Fought with the Texas cavalry under Colonel Parsons. On the Confederate side, Sophia noted, unable to keep a slight coolness from her voice. Her father had been a staunch Union supporter and had contributed significant funds to the Northern cause. Quentin's eyes narrowed slightly. Yes, though I was fighting more for my home than for any cause. He held her gaze steadily. The war's been over for 11 years, Miss Montgomery. Most folks are trying to move forward. Sophia felt a flush of shame at her reaction. You're right, I apologize, it's just. My father lost his brother at Antietam. I lost my father at Vicksburg, Quentin replied quietly. War's hell on both sides. The tension between them eased as they shared the simple meal. Outside, the storm continued to rage, lightning illuminating the cave entrance in brief, brilliant flashes, followed by crashes of thunder that seemed to shake the very mountain. Will your aunt be expecting you? Quentin asked after a while. In San Francisco, Sophia hesitated, the familiar weight of her lies settling uncomfortably on her shoulders. I sent a letter before we left Boston, but with the delays, she might be worried by now. Quentin nodded, seeming to accept this. Once we reach Fort Laramie, you can send another. Let her know you're safe. Safe. The word resonated strangely in Sophia's mind. She hadn't felt truly safe since the moment the stagecoach had been attacked. Yet here, in this cave with this near stranger, she felt. If not safe, then at least protected. I never asked, she said suddenly. What will you do after you've seen me safely to Fort Laramie? Continue tracking the gang, Quentin answered without hesitation. They've killed too many people to let them keep operating. I aim to bring them to justice. Alone. Sophia couldn't keep the concern from her voice. Wouldn't it be wiser to gather a posse or wait for reinforcements? A mirthless smile crossed his face. Reinforcements aren't coming, Miss Montgomery. The territories are too vast, and there are too few lawmen. Most of the time we work alone. That seems a lonely life, Sophia observed. Quentin's gaze lingered on her face for a moment. It can be, he admitted, but it's the life I chose. As night deepened, the storm gradually moved off, the thunder becoming more distant. Quentin insisted again on taking first watch, and this time Sophia didn't argue. She was exhausted from the day's ride, and sleep claimed her almost as soon as she laid her head down on her folded jacket. When she woke, the cave was dark except for the dim glow of the banked fire. Quentin sat by the entrance, a silhouette against the night sky which had cleared to reveal a canopy of stars. Sophia moved to join him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the night chill. You should be sleeping, she said, echoing his usual protest. Couldn't, he replied. Too much on my mind. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars. Sophia was acutely aware of him beside her, the clean scent of him beneath the dust of travel, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way his presence seemed to fill more space than his physical form. Tell me about your sister, she said softly, if you don't mind talking about her. Quentin was quiet for so long that Sophia thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. Her name was Abigail. She was 17 when they took her. Smart as a whip, always had her nose in a book, wanted to be a school teacher. He paused. She had this laugh that could light up a room. Even after our parents died, she found ways to laugh. Sophia felt a tightness in her throat. She sounds wonderful. She was. Quentin's hand clenched on his knee. When I found her, she'd been gone 3 weeks. What they did to her. He shook his head. She lived for 2 days after I brought her home, never said a word, just stared at nothing. Doctor said her mind had broken from the trauma. I'm so sorry, Sophia whispered, impulsively placing her hand over his. Quentin looked down at their hands, then slowly turned his palm up to clasp hers. When I saw you on that auction block, I saw Abby. I couldn't save her, but I could save you. The raw honesty in his voice moved something deep within Sophia. Without thinking, she leaned against his shoulder, offering what comfort she could. After a moment's hesitation, his arm came around her, holding her close. They stayed that way until the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn. The next day brought clearer weather and easier terrain as they descended from the foothills toward the plains. By midday, Quentin estimated they were only about a day's ride from Fort Laramie. "We'll camp one more night," he said as they watered the horses at a small stream. "Reach the fort by tomorrow afternoon." Sophia nodded, surprised by the pang she felt at the thought of their journey ending. In just a few days, this man had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. They made good progress throughout the afternoon, but as the sun began to set, Quentin grew increasingly alert, frequently scanning their surroundings with a frown. "What is it?" Sophia asked after he pulled up for the third time to study the horizon. "Not sure," he admitted. "Just a feeling, like we're being watched." Sophia looked around nervously but saw nothing unusual in the rolling grassland surrounding them. "The gang, maybe." Quentin urged his horse forward again. "Let's find somewhere defensible to make camp. I don't like being out in the open." They rode another mile before finding a suitable spot, a small rise with a cluster of boulders that would provide some cover. As they dismounted, Quentin kept his rifle close at hand, his gaze constantly sweeping the landscape. "Don't light a fire," he instructed as they set up camp. "Cold meal tonight." They ate in tense silence as darkness fell. Quentin insisted Sophia position herself among the boulders where she would be better protected if trouble came. He remained on the outer edge of their small camp, a vigilant sentinel. "Try to get some sleep," he told her. "I'll keep watch." "I'm not sure I can sleep," Sophia admitted. "Not with you so worried." Quentin's expression softened slightly. "It might be nothing, just ranger instinct getting the better of me." But his caution proved warranted when, an hour later, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached their ears. "Stay down," Quentin whispered, moving closer to where Sophia huddled among the rocks. "Don't make a sound." The riders approached slowly, clearly searching. Sophia counted 6 men by the sound of their horses. They came within 100 yards of the boulders, then stopped. "They were heading this way," a gruff voice carried on the night air. "Tracks lead right along here." "Probably made camp somewhere close," another replied. "Spread out, find them." Quentin pressed closer to Sophia, his body tense. "If they find us," he murmured in her ear, "I'll create a diversion. You take my horse and ride east, hard as you can. Don't stop until you reach the fort." "I'm not leaving you," Sophia protested in a fierce whisper. Before Quentin could argue, a shout went up from one of the searchers. "Over here, fresh horse droppings." "They've found our trail," Quentin said grimly, checking his revolver. "Get ready to run." But it was too late. The sound of approaching horses surrounded them, and then a voice called out, "We know you're in there, Ranger. Come on out nice and easy." Quentin's jaw tightened. "Stay behind me," he told Sophia, then stood, his revolver held ready but not pointed. "I'm coming out. The lady stays where she is." "That's not how this works," the voice replied. As Quentin stepped out from behind the boulders, lantern light illuminated the scene. 6 men on horseback, all armed, surrounding their position. The speaker was a burly man with a thick beard and cold eyes. "Bring the woman out too." "She's not part of this," Quentin said evenly. "Your quarrel's with me." The leader laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Oh, she's very much part of this. That's prime merchandise you stole from us in Redemption Creek. Do you know how much we could have gotten for her?" Sophia felt sick at his words, but she gathered her courage and stepped out to stand beside Quentin. His hand brushed hers briefly, a warning or reassurance. She wasn't sure which. "The lady is under my protection," Quentin stated, his voice carrying the full authority of his office despite their desperate situation. "Any man who touches her answers to me." "Brave words from a dead man," the leader sneered, raising his rifle. Drop your gun, Ranger." For a tense moment, Sophia thought Quentin would refuse, would choose to go down fighting. But then, with a slight nod, he carefully set his revolver on the ground. "Wise choice," the leader said. "Now, boys, let's the crack of a rifle shot split the night." The leader jerked in his saddle, a look of surprise crossing his face before he toppled to the ground. Immediately, chaos erupted. More shots rang out from the darkness beyond the circle of riders who shouted in confusion, trying to identify the new threat. Quentin reacted instantly, snatching up his revolver and pulling Sophia back into the shelter of the boulders. Two more of the gang members fell before the rest managed to retreat, galloping away into the night. "What's happening?" Sophia gasped, her heart pounding wildly. "Cavalry patrol," Quentin replied, peering cautiously around the rocks. "Fort Laramie must have sent out scouts." Sure enough, a moment later a voice called out, "United States Cavalry, identify yourselves." "Quentin Hayes, Texas Rangers," Quentin shouted back. "With a civilian. We're coming out." A group of soldiers approached, led by a young lieutenant. "Ranger Hayes, we've been looking for you. Fort Laramie received your message about tracking the Blackwater gang. Captain sent us to provide assistance." Relief washed over Sophia as she realized they were truly safe at last. The cavalry escorted them to Fort Laramie, where they arrived late the following day. Sophia was given quarters in the commanding officer's house, while Quentin reported to the captain about the Blackwater gang's activities. That evening, Sophia sat on the porch of the house, watching the activity in the fort yard. She'd been given clean clothes, a simple dress borrowed from the captain's wife, and had enjoyed the luxury of a proper bath. Yet despite these comforts, she felt unsettled, knowing that soon she would have to continue her journey westward, without Quentin. As if summoned by her thoughts, he appeared, crossing the yard toward her. He'd cleaned up as well, his hair still damp from washing, his face freshly shaved. He wore a clean shirt and vest, though he still carried his revolver at his hip. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted her, removing his hat as he approached. "How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you," she replied, gesturing for him to join her on the porch bench. "And you?" "I heard the captain is organizing a proper expedition to hunt down the remaining gang members." Quentin nodded, sitting beside her. "We ride out tomorrow at dawn. With the information from the men we captured, we should be able to find their hideout." "So soon?" Sophia couldn't keep the disappointment from her voice. Quentin studied her face. "The westbound stage leaves in 3 days. You'll be safe here until then. The captain's wife has agreed to look after you." "I see." Sophia looked down at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. "And after you've captured the gang, what then? Back to Texas, I suppose. There's always work for a ranger." He paused. "Unless—" Sophia looked up quickly. "Unless," a hint of vulnerability showed in Quentin's eyes, something she hadn't seen before. "I've been thinking about what comes after. I've spent 10 years chasing outlaws across the frontier. Maybe it's time for something different." Hope fluttered in Sophia's chest. "What would you do instead?" "I've saved some money. Enough to buy a small spread, maybe. Raise horses." He hesitated. "But a man gets lonely, living out on the frontier by himself." The meaning behind his words was clear, and Sophia felt her cheeks warm. "I imagine he would." Quentin reached out, hesitantly taking her hand in his. "I know we haven't known each other long, Miss Montgomery. And I know you have plans to continue to San Francisco, but I've come to care for you more than I thought possible in such a short time." Sophia's heart raced. The moment had come to tell the truth before things went any further. "Quentin, there's something I need to tell you. About San Francisco. About my aunt." He waited, his expression open but guarded. "There is no aunt," Sophia admitted, the words rushing out. After the stagecoach attack, I was afraid to tell anyone who I really was. My father was Harrison Montgomery. Recognition flickered in Quentin's eyes. The banking magnate. I read about his death in a newspaper. Said he was traveling with his daughter. Understanding dawned. You? Sophia nodded. My father had enemies, business rivals who would pay handsomely to get their hands on me to use as leverage against our family's interests. I thought if the gang knew who I really was, they'd have ransomed you instead of selling you, Quentin finished, and that might have been worse. Yes, Sophia squeezed his hand. I'm sorry for lying to you. I was scared. Quentin was quiet for a moment, processing this new information. So there's no one expecting you in San Francisco. Where were you really heading? Nowhere specific, Sophia admitted. Just away from Boston. My father's partner tried to force me to marry his son after father died. Said it was the only way to protect the family interests. She shook her head. I refused, so I was disinherited. The stagecoach west was my escape. And now, Quentin asked softly, what do you want now, Sophia? The sound of her name on his lips sent a warm shiver through her. I want. She took a deep breath, finding courage in his steady gaze. I want to stay. With you, if you'll have me. The smile that transformed Quentin's face made her breath catch. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I can't offer you the life you had in Boston. It would be hard work, building something from nothing. I don't want that life anymore, Sophia said firmly. I want a life where I'm free to choose my own path, my own partner. Quentin's eyes darkened with emotion. Sophia Montgomery, when I return from this mission, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Joy burst within her chest like sunrise. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. He leaned forward then, one hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. Their lips met in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise, the first of many to come. 3 days later, Sophia stood on the porch of the captain's house, watching the eastern horizon. Quentin and the cavalry patrol had been due back the previous evening, but there had been no word. The westbound stage would depart at noon, and she had already informed the captain's wife that she wouldn't be on it. He'll come back, Martha Hollister assured her, bringing out a cup of coffee. Rangers are tough as old leather. I know, Sophia said, though anxiety gnawed at her. The Blackwater gang was dangerous, and even with cavalry support, the mission was risky. As the morning wore on, Sophia's worry deepened. The stage arrived, passengers disembarked for a meal and fresh horses, and still no sign of the patrol. Noon approached, and the stage driver began calling for passengers to board. Sophia remained on the porch, her small bag of belongings at her feet. She wasn't leaving, not without knowing what had happened to Quentin. Just as the stage was preparing to depart, a sentry's shout rang out from the fort's wall. Riders approaching from the east. Sophia rushed to the gate, straining to see through the dust cloud raised by the approaching horsemen. As they drew closer, she could make out cavalry uniforms, and then her heart leapt a familiar figure riding at the front. Quentin's face was dirty and drawn with exhaustion, a bandage visible on his forearm, but he was alive. Their eyes met across the yard as he dismounted, and without caring about propriety or the curious gazes of onlookers, Sophia ran to him. He caught her in his arms, holding her tightly against him. "You're still here," he murmured against her hair. "I was afraid I'd be too late." "I told you I'd wait," Sophia replied, pulling back just enough to look up at his face. "What happened?" "We got them," Quentin said simply. "All of them. The Blackwater gang is finished." Relief and joy washed over her. "Are you hurt?" He glanced at his bandaged arm. "Just a graze." "Nothing serious." His eyes softened as he looked at her. "I handed in my resignation to the Rangers, captain's sending it through official channels." "So you're free," Sophia said, a smile spreading across her face. "Free to start that new life we talked about." Quentin reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "I know it's not much, but I want to do this properly. Sophia Montgomery, will you marry me?" Tears of happiness blurred Sophia's vision. "I already said yes." "Say it again," he urged, his eyes never leaving hers. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. They were married 2 days later in the fort's small chapel, with Captain Hollister and his wife as witnesses. Sophia wore a borrowed dress and wildflowers in her hair, while Quentin had traded his dusty range clothes for a clean black suit purchased from the fort's sutler. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. When the chaplain pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes all over again. "Where to now, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked as they left the chapel to the cheers of the fort's personnel. Sophia's heart swelled at her new name. "Wherever you think best, husband." Quentin had used his savings to purchase land in the Wyoming territory, not far from the miller's ranch. It was wild country, largely untamed but beautiful in its rugged way, much like the man she had married. They traveled for a week to reach their new home, staying at way stations and small settlements along the route. By the time they arrived at their property, Sophia had already begun to develop a fondness for the vast open spaces and dramatic landscapes of the territory. The land Quentin had bought included a small cabin that needed work, a barn in somewhat better repair, and acres of good grazing land bordered by a clear running creek. It wasn't much compared to her father's Boston mansion, but to Sophia, it represented something far more valuable: freedom and a future built on love rather than obligation. "It needs work," Quentin said apologetically as they stood before the cabin. "The roof leaks in places and the chimney needs rebuilding, but with some effort, it's perfect," Sophia interrupted, squeezing his hand. "It's ours." Their first weeks as homesteaders were challenging. There was an endless list of repairs to make the cabin livable before winter set in. Quentin taught Sophia how to ride properly, how to handle a rifle for protection, and how to identify the edible plants that grew wild on their land. In return, Sophia brought order to their home, creating comfort from sparse resources. She surprised Quentin with her willingness to learn and adapt, never complaining about the physical demands of frontier life or the isolation. "I thought you might regret it," he admitted one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and crimson. "Trading Boston society for this." Sophia leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she had never been in her previous life. "Not for a single moment. This is where I belong, with you." By their first anniversary, the transformation of their homestead was remarkable. The cabin had been expanded, the roof repaired, the chimney rebuilt. A vegetable garden flourished behind the house, and a small herd of horses grazed in the meadow, the beginning of the breeding stock Quentin hoped would eventually provide their main income. They had also become known in the scattered community of ranchers and settlers in the region. Quentin's reputation as a former Texas Ranger had preceded him, and neighbors often sought his help with problems that required his particular skills. Sophia, with her education and gentle manner, had become the unofficial teacher for the area's children, holding classes twice a week in their cabin. On the morning of their anniversary, Quentin surprised Sophia with a gift, a beautiful bay mare he had been training secretly for months. "She's gentle but spirited," he said as Sophia admired the horse. "Reminded me of you." Sophia's eyes shone with tears of happiness. "She's wonderful, Quint. Thank you." She hesitated, then added with a shy smile, "I have something for you too, though it won't arrive for about 7 more months." It took a moment for her meaning to register, but when it did, Quentin's face transformed with wonder. "You mean?" Sophia nodded, laughing as he swept her into his arms, spinning her around in jubilation. "A baby," he breathed, setting her carefully back on her feet. "Our baby." Their son, Samuel Harrison Hayes, was born the following spring, a healthy, robust boy with his father's determined chin and his mother's bright eyes. As Sophia recovered from the birth, attended by Martha Miller and a midwife from a neighboring ranch, Quentin proved himself an attentive father, proudly showing off his son to every visitor. "He'll be a fine horseman someday," he declared, cradling the infant with a tenderness that made Sophia's heart ache with love. "Not too soon, I hope," she teased. "Let him learn to walk first." Life settled into a rhythm dictated by the seasons and the needs of their growing operation. Quentin's expertise with horses had begun to attract buyers from as far away as Cheyenne and Denver. Sophia's classes had grown to include a dozen children, and there was talk of the community building a proper schoolhouse in the coming year. Their family expanded again 2 years later with the birth of their daughter, Abigail, named for Quentin's lost sister. With 2 small children, the days were full and sometimes exhausting, but Sophia never regretted the path her life had taken. One evening, as they sat by the fire after the children were asleep, Quentin pulled out a letter that had arrived with their monthly supplies from town. "It's addressed to you," he said, handing it to Sophia. "From Boston." Sophia's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the law firm's letterhead. She opened it with trembling fingers, scanning the formal language quickly. "My father's partner died," she said, looking up at Quentin. "His son, the one they wanted me to marry, has offered to settle my inheritance. The full amount with interest." Quentin's expression remained neutral. "How much?" "Enough to buy 100 ranches like this one," Sophia said quietly. "More than we could spend in a lifetime." A shadow crossed Quentin's face. "Will you go back to claim it?" Sophia set the letter aside and moved to sit beside him, taking his weathered hands in hers. "This is my home, Quint. You, the children, this land, this is all I want. The money. We can use it to expand the ranch to build that school the community needs, but I have no desire to return to Boston, even for a visit." The tension eased from Quentin's shoulders, and he gathered her close. "You could have lived like a queen. Instead, you chose to be a rancher's wife." "I chose to be your wife," Sophia corrected him, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "And that has made me happier than all the riches in Boston ever could." 5 years after they'd first met, their ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the territory. The Hayes horse breeding program was renowned throughout the West, and the small school Sophia had established with her inheritance funds now served children from 3 counties. On the anniversary of the day Quentin had rescued her from the auction block, they always took time to ride together to a special spot, a high meadow overlooking their land, where wildflowers carpeted the ground in spring and summer. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to Redemption Creek that day?" Sophia asked as they spread a blanket for their picnic. Quentin shook his head. "I try not to think about it. Some things are meant to be, I reckon." Sophia smiled, watching their children play nearby, Sam racing his little sister through the flowers, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "I believe you're right. Some things are meant to be." As the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, painting the landscape in gold and amber, Quentin pulled Sophia into his arms for a lingering kiss. "I love you, Mrs. Hayes," he murmured against her lips. "And I love you, Ranger," she replied with a smile, using the title he had long since set aside but which would always be part of who he was, the man who had pulled her onto his horse and galloped straight into her heart. Together they watched the sunset, surrounded by the beauty of the land they had claimed as their own, secure in the knowledge that their love story, begun in desperation and danger, had blossomed into something enduring and profound, a legacy of courage, commitment, and unwavering devotion that would be told and retold for generations to come. Years passed, and the Hayes Ranch flourished. Their children grew strong and capable, Sam inheriting his father's skill with horses and quiet confidence, Abigail developing her mother's intelligence and determination. Two more children joined their family, twins James and Elizabeth, completing their household with joyful chaos. Redemption Creek, once a lawless outpost where Sophia had faced her darkest hour, gradually transformed into a proper town with Quentin's guidance. He never returned to formal law enforcement, but his reputation and leadership helped establish a sheriff's office and a circuit judge's regular visits. The auction block where Sophia had once stood was torn down and replaced with a town hall where community decisions were made by vote rather than by force. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the ranch work was done, Sophia would find Quentin on the porch, gazing at the stars with a thoughtful expression. "Penny for your thoughts," she would say, settling beside him in the rocking chair he had crafted for her birthday years ago. "Just counting my blessings," he would reply, reaching for her hand. "And they all started with you." Their love story became something of a legend in the territory, how a Texas Ranger had rescued a Boston heiress from an auction block and found his own redemption in the process. Neither Quentin nor Sophia corrected the embellishments that inevitably crept into the retelling. The truth of what they had built together was more profound than any frontier tale. As their children grew into adults, pursuing their own dreams, Sam taking over much of the ranch operations, Abigail teaching at the school her mother had founded, the twins finding their separate paths, Quentin and Sophia remained the steady center around which their family orbited. On their 30th anniversary, their children surprised them with a gathering that brought together friends and neighbors from miles around. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing under the stars. "Did you ever imagine this?" Sophia asked as Quentin led her in a dance, his movements still graceful despite the silver now threading his dark hair. "That day in Redemption Creek, did you ever imagine we would have all this?" Quentin's eyes, still as intensely blue as the day they'd met, held hers with unwavering devotion. "I knew from the moment I pulled you onto my horse that I would never let you go. The rest." He gestured at the gathering around them, their children and grandchildren, their friends, the community they had helped build. "This is beyond even my wildest hopes." As the years continued to pass, they faced their share of hardships, drought seasons that threatened the ranch, illnesses that tested their strength, the inevitable losses that come with a long life fully lived. But through it all, their partnership remained unshakable, a testament to the bond forged in those desperate days when they had first met. In their twilight years, they would often sit together on the porch of the home they had built, watching new generations continue their legacy. Sometimes they spoke of the past, sometimes of the future, but always with the deep contentment of those who had found their true purpose in loving one another. "No regrets?" Quentin would ask occasionally, his hand warm around hers. And Sophia, thinking back to that terrifying day on the auction block and the extraordinary journey that had followed, would always answer the same way. "Not one," she would say, meaning it with all her heart. "Every moment led us here." For in the end, it wasn't the land they had tamed or the wealth they had built that defined their success. It was the love they had nurtured, brave and steadfast, tested by adversity and strengthened by shared purpose, that stood as their greatest achievement. A love that had begun in the chaos of the untamed West and had grown into something as enduring as the mountains that watched over their home, a love that had saved them both.